Wild swans in a winter landscape. Surely one of the most beautiful sights in nature. It was just such a spectacle as this, half a century ago, that inspired some of the most popular wildlife pictures ever painted, and started a movement that now ensures the survival of such creatures throughout this country and far beyond its shores. This is a tribute to a remarkable man and a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the organisation he founded, the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. Summer's end, and one of the greatest mass movements of life begins across the northern world. Hundreds of thousands of waterfowl fly south to visit some very special parts of Britain. And none have done more to highlight the importance of such places than the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust that has been based at Slimbridge for the last 50 years. Wetlands are vital for countless plants and animals of many kinds that can survive nowhere else. The sight of wild geese spilling from the sky still conjures up one name: Peter Scott. Born in 1909, the son of the Antarctic explorer, his mother was a celebrated sculptress and artist. So it was no surprise that with determination and talent, he became the country's most popular painter of wildfowl. He also became an expert on his fast-growing collection of subjects. But then Peter Scott seemed to achieve almost everything he set out to do. Decorated for gallantry in the Royal Navy, he was an Olympic yachtsman and a gliding champion. Yet his passion for wildlife remained predominant. Prints of his paintings once seemed to adorn almost every home in Britain and could be found around the world. In 1946, he moved to Slimbridge on the edge of the Severn Estuary and founded the Wildfowl Trust. The success of the public centre and his popular appeal with increasing numbers of visitors meant that he took to radio like a duck to water, and the audience loved him.
There was even one which had his picture in the paper the other day, who was, I think, 32 years old.
It brought him new fame, and in 1955, a new role in infant television, live from the nearby BBC studios in Bristol.
Well, now, here with me is Paul-Émile Victor, the distinguished polar explorer, who is 10 days, and then we came down to Trinidad.
His series was one of the first great successes of the fledgling BBC Natural History Unit.
Lounging along the beach,
That's
which is rather an unusual habit for an armadillo. And they trot along the road, sort of pacing the car, you know, and really looking charming, like sort of clockwork toys.
Under the guidance of Peter and his wife, Philippa, the Wildfowl Trust grew rapidly and eventually added Wetlands to its name to reflect its broadening interests. He was attracted to gliding, he said, because that way he could get a better feeling for the world of a goose. On his last flight in a glider, he remembered the day he first saw Slimbridge.
Well, it was a marvellous day because it was the day that we saw this very rare lesser white-fronted goose and 8 different kinds of wild geese in one day. And that was all in the field, which is almost exactly underneath us at the moment. And that was a great day, and when I came back I said, boy, this is where I'm going to come and live.
Sir Peter Scott died in his 80th year, But he left a living legacy of wildfowl centres across Britain, at Wetland in East Anglia and Calaverock on the Solway Firth, Martinmere in Lancashire and Washington near Newcastle, Arundel in Sussex, Llanelli on the South Wales coast, Castle Espy in Northern Ireland, and the new London centre being built at Barn Elms. This is armchair wildlife watching at its best, from the visitor centre at Wetland on the Ouse Washes. The surrounding reserve provides a safe wintering ground for thousands of wild Buick swans from Arctic Russia and larger whooper swans from Iceland. Tens of thousands of migrating ducks also depend on this internationally important wetland. Yes, these are wild swans, normally shy and very wary of people. Yet with regular feeding, the birds have learnt to trust the man with the barrow. But the real attraction for wildfowl here is the annual flooding of the River Ouse that makes these vast wetlands so special. Nightfall, and the scene is set for a real swan lake. Feeding by floodlight is a popular feature at some visitor centres. With the arrival of freezing weather, free handouts become a vital additional source of food. Each morning, the swans leave the safety of the centre's lagoon to feed out on the surrounding fields. Careful year-round management of the reserves and a good relationship with adjacent landowners has secured a healthy future for these birds. Nearly 1,000 whooper swans now depend on that goodwill. So too do some 6,000 of the smaller Buick swans, and that's about a third of the European population. At times, the observatory at Wetland seems like an international avian airport, with regular transatlantic and transcontinental arrivals. Wetland is one of the most famous and important traditional wintering grounds in Britain for Buick swans. Yet elsewhere there are other attractions for both people and birds. Martinmere in Lancashire. For centuries, pink-footed geese from Iceland have overwintered here. Once counted in hundreds, numbers have since soared. Today, up to 27,500 of these birds flock to this internationally recognised wetland each year. It would seem that few other places in Britain could rival such a scene. Yet far to the north, another great journey has begun. As summer draws to a close in the high Arctic, a migration of epic proportions is already underway. Barnacle geese heading south to Scotland. Their destination, Caerlaverock, on the banks of the Solway Firth. Newly arrived hooper swans from Iceland share this northern reserve with the geese. Incredibly, the entire population of barnacle geese from the polar islands of Svalbard, one of the world's most northern lands, spend the winter months here, all 13,000 of them. Few other birds in the world have been monitored longer. Yet, just 50 years ago, they were in danger of extinction, with less than 400 left in the wild. Today, their future is more assured. But any creature that confines its living to just 2 small places on Earth will always be vulnerable. Here, at least, they're safe, if shooting around the reserve can be controlled. Caerlaverock, the most northerly of the wetland centres, not surprisingly suffers the coldest winters. So migrant hoopers, along with resident mute swans and other wildfowl, make the most of any extra food on offer. And feeding brings benefits to people as well as birds, for it not only allows visitors to watch the birds at close quarters, but scientists to study them intensively. At Slimbridge, an old hunter's technique is still used to catch wildfowl. A net funnel, part of a decoy, on the far side of the Swan Lake, is put to a more peaceful purpose. Food lures the birds inside. The operation is run military style, starting at dawn. While the birds outside are fed again to calm them, researchers and volunteers quietly drive the catch down to the far end of the netted tunnel. For some of the birds, this is a new experience, but for others, it's an annual event, and they are in safe, expert hands. The Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust employs some 200 staff, assisted by over 1,000 volunteers. Education and research form the basis of its work. Today, conservation is big business. It needs to be. The issues are serious. Knowledge may be the key to a species' survival. Here, the aim is to identify, weigh, and measure as many birds as possible, calmly and quietly.
This is a Riga Latvian ring, C91283, and it's a young female, first winter female, probably ringed last summer in Latvia.
Ring numbers are allocated by international agreement. Buick swans, like other wildfowl, face many hazards on migration, but not all are obvious. Individual birds can be recognised by their bill pattern, a fact recognised by Peter Scott and his family. But each one is also numbered with a special large leg ring. It's big enough to be seen in the wild from a distance, so a bird's movements can be monitored from year to year. And eventually it will identify a casualty. The results of X-rays are disturbing. Astonishingly, studies have shown that as many as 1/3 of all adult Bewick swans have been injured. Although the wounds have healed, this bird is unlikely to survive, carrying so much lead shot.
Surprising when you look at the number of pellets in there.
While the birds are safe in their winter refuge, protecting them between here and their Arctic breeding grounds is no easy task. When the study of wildfowl began at Slimbridge 50 years ago, it was not even known where many birds spent the summer, let alone over which countries they flew. Only now is half a century of research bringing benefits for the birds. Backed up by volumes of detailed studies, international negotiations to protect wildfowl on migration have at last resulted in the first of the flyway agreements, signed at the Bonn Convention. But some dangers can't be predicted. It's the end of March 1995, and despite the unseasonal cold in Britain, the swans are becoming restless. They're ready to begin their long journey back to northern Russia, but as wildfowl researchers are preparing to follow them, appalling news breaks.
An oil spill last year, again in northern Russia, has also caused environmental concern. Workers are fighting to contain damage described as worse than that caused by the Exxon Valdez disaster. The incident happened last October at Ozinsk, close to today's explosion at Ukhta. The spill was contained over the winter while rivers were frozen, but it's now spreading across the countryside, putting thousands of birds and other wildlife at risk.
The true scale of the oil spill is only now becoming clear as the earlier than expected spring thaw melts the ice. Thousands of tons of oil across a wide area of this Arctic region. On this site alone, trenches up to 6 feet deep and as big as football pitches have been dug to contain the sludge. It's the home of migrating birds, due to return in just a few weeks' time.
Downstream, inside the Arctic Circle, the oil will reach the mouth of the Pechora River and the swans' breeding grounds, unless it's stopped. This is tundra, barely above sea level, frozen for much of the year. In summer, the soil above the permafrost begins to melt, and then it becomes a soggy paradise for birds. Few people venture this far north. Russian scientists have studied the area over the last 20 years, but only since 1991 have outsiders been permitted. For wildfowl researchers John Bowler and Dr. Jane Claricoats, along with their Russian colleagues, home for the next 6 weeks is a long-abandoned fishing village. Temminck stint are the most vocal of the many wading birds that come here to breed. It's nearly the middle of June, and there is still no sign of any oil. Summer in the Arctic is short. But the bonus for birds and researchers alike is 24 hours of daylight. An old fish processing barn becomes an observation tower to locate the scattered Bewick swan nests. In the bird world, as elsewhere, latecomers have less choice, easily straying into other birds' territories. And that's bad news when that territory belongs to a pair of Arctic skuas. Scavengers of the tundra, skuas are intolerant of any intruders, however big. You have to be fit to survive in the land of the midnight sun. The white-fronted goose, a familiar winter visitor to Slimbridge, keeps a wary eye open for the Arctic fox, always keen to steal an egg. Meanwhile, back at the barn, business has begun. The meticulous logging of data is the fuel that feeds scientific research, but it requires special dedication in such conditions. It's now just a week before midsummer. In the Arctic, the weather can change dramatically. For the past 2 weeks, temperatures have barely struggled above freezing. Now, a change in the wind brings some warmth. Summer finally comes to the tundra as the last snow melts. The stems of Arctic willow lie close to the ground to escape the worst of the chilling wind. Bog rosemary and marsh marigold briefly bloom, while white cloudberries carpet the tundra. The air is filled with a new sound, swarms of mosquitoes. The Buick swans have already begun their long vigil of incubation. They tend to pair for life, and both partners seem to take their turn on the eggs. Until recently, little was known about their breeding, and this is probably the first time they have been filmed on the nest. Shy and wary birds, only the most experienced will succeed in rearing a brood. Every detail of their behaviour will be watched over the next few weeks. But Jane is not the only one to use the cabin roof. For birds like snow bunting, the abundant supply of insect food and continuous summer light is the main attraction here. It's a fact also exploited by an extraordinary wader. The reeve is the female of the ruff, and their display ground is known as a lek. Competition is fierce. While the ruffs fight with each other for dominance, the reeves just fly in to choose and to mate. In contrast, the life of the long-tailed duck seems quiet. They hide their nest safely in long grass. Summertime is passing, and eggs will soon be hatching. White swans can't hide so easily. Their head and neck are stained brown by the water and mud of the shallow pools in which they feed. Being so obvious when nesting, they are understandably nervous. Despite the remoteness of this area, swan eggs and meat are a highly prized food for the scattered indigenous people of these parts. Although the swans are protected by Russian laws, isolation makes them vulnerable. They sneak away at the first sign of any approach. Dr. Yuri Shadilov, from the Russian Institute of Nature Conservation, is an authority on these swans. Having visited the tundra over the last 2 decades, he's now working closely with the British researchers. The reasons why the swans choose this region, the Russky Zavorot Peninsula, and the factors that govern their success are only now becoming apparent. For Buick swans, at least, this is probably the most important breeding ground in the world. Covering the eggs not only keeps them warm, but prevents predators from finding them before the swans return. Skuas are always on the lookout for an unguarded nest. Incubation takes up to 30 days, but cold can still kill. Below ground, just a swan's neck away, lies the permafrost, nature's deep freeze. Keeping the nest well built is a vital part of their routine. It's a race against time. The shortness of the Arctic summer gives them just one chance of breeding success. In less than 3 months, they must lead their new family back towards Britain. That's if the weather, the scavengers, and the threat of an oil spill don't bring disaster first. Meanwhile, in Iceland, another team and another swan. Richard Hesketh, warden of the Trust Reserve at Kalavarok, is after hooper swans, helped by the Icelandic Coast Guard. Catching is well practiced and efficient. A specially developed swan jacket calms the bird and keeps the wings secure. It's the end of July, and these hooper swans are non-breeding birds. They've collected on a lake in northeast Iceland to molt, and that means they're flightless. It's an ideal opportunity to monitor their progress and identify new birds. This is another international expedition, made up of researchers and volunteers from Iceland, England, Scotland and Ireland, another place where hooper swans overwinter.
Should be 4198, is it?
Yep, this is the 4DD.
4DD.
And the tarsus is 131.4.
Ole Arnason, an Icelandic researcher employed by Slimbridge, organises this end of the operation. And the temporary mark on the back of the swan's neck ensures that it isn't caught a second time. When they're handled with care, it's difficult to believe that these really are wild swans. But the real work is only just beginning. Hooper swans nest in the floodlands of the fjords, choosing large weed-filled pools. A rather special swan has been seen. She is molting and her cygnets are too young to fly. The task now is to catch the entire family. All the team have to do is find them. It's no easy job, wading waist deep in icy water. And it's surprising how a swan can just disappear. But success is only a cygnet away. The last makes it 5 young, a good-sized brood. For the cygnets, this is a new experience. But for one little Icelandic girl at least, this too is a new encounter. Meanwhile, the cygnet's mother, known simply as JSC, is receiving special attention. She and her mate, CIA, are regular visitors to Kelavarok in Scotland. Much is now known about hooper swans, but there still remains one intriguing aspect of their lives. Breeding here in Iceland, they make the long journey south across the North Atlantic to winter in the British Isles. But how long and at what height do they fly? Some 30 years ago, a flock of swans was seen by an airline pilot flying at over 8,000 metres. Somewhere off the Outer Hebrides, they were even tracked by radar. Now they're to be followed by satellite. A special lightweight transmitter secured by tailor-made straps has been developed by Professor Colin Pennycook from Bristol University.
Just get that position on the back.
For Richard, the welfare of the swan is the most important part of his job, and fitting the device is delicate work. Hopefully, it will enable the researchers to follow every move. But half a world away, on the other side of the Earth, it's a very different story. Hawaii, a land still in the making, home to some of the world's rarest plants and animals. The planet's most active volcanoes are the last places you would expect to find wildfowl. Yet here among the steaming craters lives the Nene, the Hawaiian goose. This is the most remote landmass on Earth. Many of its animals and plants live nowhere else, and tragically, most are in trouble. In the 18th century, some 25,000 Nene inhabited the Hawaiian Islands. But by 1950, only 30 of them existed in the wild. They were on the brink of extinction. A scheme was started in Hawaii to breed them in captivity, and Peter Scott sent his curator from the Wildfowl Trust to help. 3 birds were brought back to Britain. The project was an outstanding success. Indeed, so successful that since the first arrivals, over 2,000 Nene have been reared at Slimbridge. Many have been distributed to bird collections worldwide, but the ultimate aim was to re-establish them in the wild. So some 300 birds were released back in Hawaii. Today, breeding continues at Slimbridge, and the goslings and their parents have become well known to the thousands of visitors that pass through the centre's gates each year. In fact, so familiar, we tend to forget how rare these creatures really are. But while the Nene's future seems safe in captivity, it's sadly not so secure in Hawaii. It seems extraordinary that any creature can survive the devastation of an active volcano. Yet the Nene is no ordinary goose. Ringed and released birds are carefully monitored. Nene are related to Canada geese and have evolved in isolation over thousands of years. The reduced webbing between strong toes is an adaptation to living on rough, dry lava. Feeding on the sparse vegetation, they appear to need little water. Only recently was it realised that the last remaining Nene were surviving in just a small area on the extreme edge of their original range. Once to be found throughout the islands, they were forced to remain on the volcano tops by the pressure of people. Hunting, habitat loss, and introduced predators have all taken their toll. Lush grasslands on the lower slopes provide better grazing, but hide dangers. The mongoose was originally imported to control rats in the cane fields. Sadly, they not only take geese, they also take their eggs, just as the rats do. Penned for protection, these birds are part of a major conservation project. Working together, the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, Volcanoes National Park, and the state of Hawaii are trying to turn the tide. Alarmingly, the population of Nene in the wild is still decreasing, despite the numbers being released. Wild pigs and feral cats only add to the Nene's problems. Fencing some of the breeding and release areas helps to reduce the numbers being killed, but it's an expensive option. So too is trapping mongoose. But what price an entire species? There is still hope. This family of Nene, about to be given their freedom, will be carefully monitored by Frederica Voog, a researcher from Slimbridge working in Hawaii. The results from the past few years of study may help to throw a new lifeline to the birds. Management of lowland grasses for Nene is vital. Regular cutting maintains a rich supply of new growth in safe areas. Before the discovery of Hawaii by the Western world and the invasion of people and predators that followed, this was prime Nene country. Now it's overgrown by African grasses, but ones the geese seem to like, especially when short. And that's also one of the reasons why they seem to be attracted to roads. But roads are dangerous places, and the occasional roadside snack offered by tourists in the national park just makes matters worse. Every year, several geese are killed in accidents. When a bird is as rare as the Nene, every casualty counts. And being an endangered species, every fatality is reported.
Resource Management, 520. I'd like to report a dead Nene.
Mauna Kea, Hawaii's highest peak. Up here, under the equatorial sun, the lava desert simmers in the morning heat. When wild geese breed, this is where they come. There are fewer predators here and a scattered supply of food. In the desert, ohelo, a kind of bilberry, and another fruit, the pukeawe, are favoured by the adult geese and important for goslings. There are less than 600 Nene left in the wild, and time is running out. Only with careful management can they continue to fly free. There are still many questions that need answers, even if that means more painstaking work. Counting samples of individual berries can tell us how many geese this area can naturally support, and that's vital if more birds are to be released. Not only is the future of a unique creature at risk here, but also state pride. The Nene is, after all, Hawaii's national bird. Back at Slimbridge, the hatchery is where many Nene and other wildfowl have been reared. Open to the public at special times, the work here is often at the cutting edge of species survival. And hand-rearing is often the only way to increase numbers of rare birds. The number of eggs hatched in a single season can be increased many times using incubators. The scale of the operation is impressive, but then its founder never seemed to do anything by halves. While summer management continues on the reserves, new plans are being made for the next 50 years. And it starts at Slimbridge, where it all began. An impressive new visitor centre will cope with the increasing numbers of people flocking to the biggest wildfowl collection in the world. The Prince of Wales is president of the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust.
As president, I can only say that I hope all of you will be able to support the plans for the future which the Trust has unveiled today. And it is terribly important, I think, that the work of the WWT in continuing to save wetlands and these very important habitats for wildlife and people goes on.
Summer ends early in Iceland, and our Hooper Swan family are leaving. JSC and her mate, CIA, lead their cygnets on the most dangerous journey of their young lives, their first crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, at the mercy of the weather, they are on their own, but not unseen. Incredibly, every move is being monitored. The tiny transmitter, carried by JSC, automatically switched itself on just a few weeks ago. It's now relaying her position and height back to a computer in Bristol. Flying surprisingly low at around 600 meters, the air temperature is still cold, 5 degrees below freezing. Professor Colin Pennycook plots their progress. At Caerlaverock in Scotland, other swan families are already beginning to arrive for the winter. They have successfully made the long haul from Iceland in good conditions. But the weather forecast is not good, and the reserve warden still has no news.
Hello, WWT Caerlaverock? Oh, Colin! Colin, how are you doing? Sorry? Oh, it's left. Brilliant. Which one? Oh, JSC. Great. What time was this?
Well, she must have left the Iceland coast about 6 this morning, and she should be into Skye about a couple of hours from now, I'd say.
Well, that's good news.
She'll be into Skye before dark.
While signals reveal the progress of JSC, they can't tell us if all 5 of her family are still following. After an overnight stop near the Isle of Skye, daybreak finds the swans back in the air. But how many? So far, the birds are keeping just ahead of the storm sweeping across the Atlantic.
At 0700 GMT, southeast Iceland, Faroes and Hebrides, southwest gale force 8, wind backing southerly, increasing to severe gale force 9 imminent.
Mid-morning at Calaverock. The barnacle geese have arrived, the skies are clouding over, and there's still no sign of JSC. But a man in Bristol knows where she is and when she will arrive.
WWT Calaverock? Oh, Colin, yes. Yeah? Oh, right, brilliant. Okay, I'll go and have a look for her in a minute. We've had quite a few birds turning up this morning. There's a lot of new birds have been turning up, 1 or 2 families as well in amongst them. Yeah. So, well, I hope she's still got her 5 cygnets with her. We'll have to go out and see, see what's around. Right, I'll pop up the town now and have a quick scan over the birds and see what I can find.
As Richard races upstairs, more swans fly in. Is it the family we first saw in Iceland less than 3 months ago? There are 5 cygnets, all with rings. And there's the transmitter. It is JSC and her mate CIA. But then these are experienced birds. This is the 3rd brood they've successfully reared and guided back to Britain. They've flown more than 1,600 kilometres and spent over 12 hours in the air. A welcome supply of grain for the parents is another new experience for the cygnets as they learn the daily routine of the reserve. And what of the transmitter? It will soon be recovered to be used another year by another swan. When Peter Scott first started his lifelong work, little could he have realised how far he would go and how many people he would touch. We can now follow a family of swans across the Atlantic, breed even the rarest creatures in captivity, and through education, capture the imagination of children, our future, worldwide. What we cannot do is bring back those species that have already disappeared. But for the vision of one man and a team of dedicated followers, many wild places where wetland life exists would now be lost forever. The importance of fresh water takes on a new priority with global warming. With changing weather patterns and greater demands, the conservation of wetlands for wildlife and people has never been more significant.